And that really blew my mind. Like, I cried about it. I wrote poems about it. I was like blown away that someone would ask permission first, and then blown away by the fact that I'd never experienced that before, despite having been around the block a little bit. Hello, beautiful soul family. Britt Cannon here, host of the Walk On podcast, the podcast where I try to demystify spirituality, personal growth and healing, and whatever else I feel like talking about. This week's episode is called The Healing Power of Consent. As always, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and to click the link in the description box below to check out the full hour-long audio podcast episode. It's a long sort of thing that YouTubers have to say, isn't it? That should be monetizable in and of itself. Anyway, so consent. In the episode, I talk a lot about how our consent on a political level, on a world level, on a national level is manufactured. This is like a term codified by Noam Chomsky, manufactured consent, which is where through propaganda, our consent around political conflict, around even things like capitalism, and just all this stuff that nationalism cultivates and nurtures and expects of us, can lead us into a direction of consenting to things that we might not have otherwise consented to of our own free will. I think that consent is really rooted in having all of the information, and so much of the way our government works operates under secrecy, under withholding information, and under spin as far as media is concerned. Whether you engage with media on the right or on the left, there is most assuredly a spin taking place with the intention of steering you in one direction or another, instead of just like coming at the issues from your own place, gathering information, necessary information based in facts, and making an educated decision from there. And then consenting on how to move forward with that information in place. We're given skewed information, less and less true information, definitely less and less objective information as we engage with social media and the algorithms, which just tend to give us more of what we click on. And how that is really a kind of coercive consent or coercive control, where the outcome is, the desired outcome by the ruling class is created by the way that they manipulate us. And in sexual relationships and interpersonal relationships, coercion is abuse. Coercion is sexual assault. You know, if someone is yelling at you, screaming at you, throwing things, guilting you, threatening to leave because you say no to them to engage sexually, that is not okay. Like, categorically, we have decided post Me Too that behavior is wrong and punishable, and maybe not by law, because the law has some catching up to do, but at least on a sort of call out worthy level, that kind of behavior we understand is not okay. Our relationship to consent and the gray areas that have previously existed, you know, in terms of things like power imbalances, age gaps, and stuff like that, it has grown and evolved and understands the nuance and the complications of how those things can be perceived as trauma. They may not have felt traumatic in the moment, but like looking back, we can see in the proper context how they were in fact traumatic or abusive and generally not okay. That coercion is how our government works. on getting us to agree to, or at least not make a huge fuss about things that maybe if we had all the information on, we would respond differently. And that trickles down into our interpersonal relationships. Consent requires a certain amount of vulnerability and authenticity and honesty and like a little bit of a blunt communication style, right? Like it can be sexy, like in sexual scenarios, like, do you like that? Does that feel good? Like stuff like that. You know, they can be really sexy if said in the right voice, in the right context. And they don't have to stop the flow of things. In fact, it can make it better, you know? It can make it more intimate. It can make it definitely, you know, little moments of checking in can show a care and like compassion and an openness that makes everyone feel safe and makes everyone feel at ease. This is something that BDSM has really taught me, because mercifully, beautifully, amazingly, almost like miraculously, finding BDSM really helped me learn the kind of consent that I should have been expecting from my sexual relationships my whole life that I didn't. You know, I wasn't until my mid-20s that someone even asked consent before penetrating me, and that really blew my mind. Like I cried about it, I wrote poems about it. I was like blown away that someone would ask permission first, and then blown away by the fact that I'd never experienced that before, despite having been around the block a little bit. So, yeah, in BDSM situations, because safety is such a concern and safety is such a priority and everyone's comfort and consent is really prioritized, you know, there's rules at play parties like you don't come inebriated. Everyone, you know, you have discussions around like, what are you into? What are you specifically not into? What do you need me to stay away from? And there's like a negotiation that takes place even before you do a scene together. And that really enables dropping of the guard and like a relaxation that can be really healing. So even on like a kink level, and the way that community and like people who participate in those kinds of scenes focus on consent, center consent, and yet it's still subversive, it's still sexy, it's still kinky. That really shows us how healing and how beautiful and how truly like sensual consent can be. But on any level, it's true. And on any level, we can analyze and really explore the ways that consent is not valued. I was just thinking as I was setting up to film this video, I didn't talk about this in the podcast, but I was just thinking about the consent of gender and how like that is so violated in children from just like really cringy traditions like gender reveal parties to boys play with blue, girls play with pink, you know, don't cry if you're a boy, rub some dirt in it, kid. And like, if you're a girl, you have to be pretty and thin and submissive. And just like all of these cookie cutter gender things that are projected onto children and they are expectations projected onto them by parents that they will conform to. And then if a kid comes out as trans, then you have situations where their consent is further violated by dead naming them, misgendering them, refusing to accept them for who they are in places like Texas right now, in Florida, totally erasing their identities, allowing your underage child to transition, child abuse. Like things have gotten really out of hand. And they were already pretty bad to begin with. But even just the gender, like the violation of consent of one's own gender. Like if you go back and watch my What Gender video or listen to the podcast, I talk a lot about how everyone's individual gender is like their journey. It's their movie. It's their trip. And for anyone else to tell them that's wrong or that's bad or that's not right or whatever is like bizarre to me. It's like saying like your voice isn't your voice or your face isn't your face. It's like, fuck off. Yes, it is. Don't gaslight me about my own experience. But we really kind of lost the plot as far as consent is concerned in every shape and form. I mean, parents do it to their children like constantly. It's like that whole I know what's best for you mentality when really like you're just an older person. Like, I mean, as far as bedtimes, like what foods you need to eat, although even that is like, you know, can get dicey because people love to exert control over any little place or person they can find to exert control. I mean, look at like managers or, you know, mid-level bosses, or we're all just constantly in a space of trying to grasp on whatever little amount of power we can have and exert it over someone else in order to feel like we have some minuscule amount of control in our lives because so much is out of our control that we violate each other's consent all the time. Sometimes we can get so focused, so zeroed in on what we want and like our most desirable outcome that we can forget about other people's experiences, other people's feelings and their whole journey and trip or whatever, and we can stomp all over their boundaries and consent and desires on the way to get what we want. And I don't even think that that's necessarily like a conscious choice people make, but it is a thing that happens all the time. Which brings me back to the healing nature of consent. Like the healing nature of consent can make you feel safe. It's like, think about that thing that we are all of a sudden teaching kids, which I wish was around when I was a kid, which is that like, if you don't want to hug someone, you don't have to. If someone asks you for a hug, you can say no, and they have to listen to you. That makes someone feel safe in their body. That makes someone feel like they have autonomy over their own experience. That means that that teaches them so much. Like teaching kids the old way of like, oh, come on, give that person a hug. Oh, come on, give that person a kiss. It teaches them that they're not allowed to say no. And then when you get to talking about like stranger danger or warning them about how to handle someone trying to cross their physical boundaries in a really abusive way, things get confusing because it's like, well, you've been telling me I have to give a hug when I don't want to my whole life. And now all of a sudden I'm supposed to like protect myself from these dangerous people, and I'm confused because it's confusing. But think about that child that feels empowered to say no and mean it and have it respected. It allows a certain amount of courage. It allows a certain amount of trust in oneself that I know how to take care of myself. I know how to say no and mean it. I know how to voice my opinion. And that is really empowering. As with everything is everything. So the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. That person is now a lot more confident, a lot more empowered, and a lot stronger in their resolve and in their own self-protection. We live in a sort of I think it's the culmination of a lot of generational trauma that's been undealt with for like many generations. And the co-occurrence of the fallout of late stage capitalism. I think we live in a place of being really disconnected from our emotions, really disconnected from our truth, and really disconnected from or shameful about vulnerability. And so people are kind of really taught by their families, by this family first, like mafia mentality of like, you don't talk about what goes on in this house outside of this house. You know, if you have a problem with someone, you just sweep it under the rug and keep pretending like everything's fine. If you really need to get it off your chest, like gossip about them, but definitely don't confront them because then you're a troublemaker. And so we are raised to ignore our own emotions, ignore our own boundaries, ignore our own needs in favor of keeping the peace. And this is true in capitalism, like in our capitalist society. You know, if you're sick, go to work. If you're sad, go to work. If you know, like, don't miss a day, for God's sakes, don't take care of yourself. Don't use your vacation days, like work after you clock out and before you clock in, and, you know, don't ask for anything and don't expect to be treated special, and maybe think about not taking your 15-minute breaks. Just like put your own well-being aside in favor of your work family, your store you work for, the school you work for, whatever. I mean, look at COVID. It's like an extreme example of this very thing. You know, pretend like it's not happening. Take your masks off. Be free. Go back to normal, even though it's totally still here. And we are so out of alignment with how we actually feel that many people, this is what happens when people go to therapy or when people get triggered in relationships. You know, something triggers you and you feel a grain of sand amount of the pain that's living underneath the surface of you, just holding yourself together with like yarn. And you feel the grain of sand amount of pain that's underneath there, and you close up and you run away, or you just stuff it down further and carry on. And so we are deeply afraid of being vulnerable, because being vulnerable leaves you open to heartache, to rejection, to abandonment, and to all the triggers that live underneath the surface that you've been desperately trying to run away from or deny are there. And consent, conversations around consent require vulnerability. Telling someone, hey, I know we're friends, but I have romantic feelings for you. What do you think about that? Leaves you two options. Either they say no, and you have to decide, do I stay and try to recontextualize my feelings, or do I leave this relationship behind and move on? Or they say yes, and we have to like figure this out now. And that's, you know, that's life. It's complicated, it's messy, it's not ideal. But your other option is to not say anything, to harbor those feelings forever unfulfilled, forever in regret, because you couldn't express yourself honestly. And I feel like that is the most painful of all those options. At least if you tell them and they reject you, you can move on with your life. If you don't put yourself out there, you'll never know, and you'll always be left to wonder. In conversations around like sex and consent in relationships and stuff like that, the vulnerability is again in being rejected, but also like just being afraid of the fallout. You know, like if you're in a relationship that you haven't had sex for a long time and one of you wants to and the other one doesn't, usually that's a symptom of a deeper issue, whether it's that your partner just has a lower sex drive, or they may even be asexual and they didn't really know that when you first got together, or maybe there's a deeper problem in the relationship that hasn't been addressed and that is messing with the attraction, or maybe they're going through something that's fucking with their libido, like whatever it might be. To just like pout about it and not address it, and not like to just feel entitled to sex, or to just ignore the problem and feel like I don't have to address this. Like I don't want to fuck my partner, and you know, I don't want to talk about why. Like that just causes a bigger and bigger and bigger rift. And talking about it might not solve the problem in the sense that it might not fix the relationship, but seeing the problem in the relationship or the new discoveries in identity, talking about it is the only way to really move forward and attend to everyone's needs in a way that's satisfying for everyone. And it doesn't always work the way we want it to. Life rarely does, like a lot of times the vulnerability that comes with conversations that are honest and authentic and consent-based lead to necessary changes that can be painful and scary and not what we want in the moment. But when we're operating from a place of consent, when we're operating from a place of boundaries and emotional honesty, and I don't know, just like being true to ourselves, things do work out better than when we're not. And this is what I always come to. This is like the conclusion of the Walk On podcast in general, but it's just like, if you're not doing what's true to you, if you're not moving in alignment with your highest good, resentment builds, unhappiness builds, a dissatisfaction builds, and we're going to get our needs met. Like, whether it's above board and honestly, or whether it's sneaky and manipulative or subconscious, we're going to get our needs met, or we're at least going to attempt to. And it's better to just like make the unconscious conscious and to move with integrity, because then we're co-creating the reality we want, instead of co-creating a shadow version of that reality where we're almost there, because that's so painful. And so as you move through the world this week, I challenge you to engage with consent, to like ask people the direct questions that you need to in order to get all of the information in order to make fully informed decisions. And when you're asking someone else for their consent, give them all the necessary information. Really try to communicate honestly, authentically, and lovingly and compassionately, but with boundaries, and see what happens. See how much clearer life becomes. See how much less confusing life becomes. And I just want to remind anyone watching who like is putting these tips in these videos into practice, that if someone is out of alignment with this kind of healing, with this kind of work, with this kind of authenticity, they will run from you. But as painful as that is in the moment, it's better in the long run. It's better to not be dealing with someone like that. It's better to create space in your life and in your energy for people who can meet you where you are, or who can even be, even more sure of themselves, even further along their journey, and then they can help mentor you and carry you along. It's not that everyone has to be perfect. It's just that you can't make someone travel this path. You can't want it for someone. All you can do is heal yourself. All you can do is love yourself. And it can definitely be painful. It does at times feel like a big sacrifice, but things are working out for your highest good. This will end up in a much happier, much more fulfilling, much more reciprocal experience of love and friendship and work and life in general. You'll just be riding a much more loving, compassionate, honest vibe, and that is sustainable. Where we can get really burnt out when we're pretending to be someone we're not, when we're just running ourselves ragged to meet other people's needs, that is not sustainable. We crash, we recover, we go back. We crash, we recover, we go back. And in this way of being, in a loving, authentic, honest, and consent-based way of being and relating to others, it can go on and on and on forever, because your cup is always full. If you would like to listen to the full episode, you can click the link down below to do that. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe and all that goodness to help make sure that more than 3 people are getting this free content. You can check out my website, brittcannon.me, for photos and blog posts and links to my self-love course, which is a 30-day journal-centered self-love course where we explore journal writing prompts, boundary laying, self-care and self-care ritual work, mirror work. There are guided meditations. I also do a start of the course and end of the course tarot reading for you and help you with intention setting. It's really fun. It's really cool. I worked really hard on it, and I think it's going to be really helpful. I'm doing it myself right now because I can't sell something that I haven't done myself, and it's really reminding me how important a spiritually centered life is for me. Obviously, I do this kind of work, so it is spiritually centered, but in an external way. And this is doing my own course is reminding me the internal spirituality that sometimes this work doesn't leave time for, and it feels really good to be prioritizing it again. You can listen to my debut EP Mantra, which the song at the beginning and end of this episode Walk On is on. And you can also listen to my album I made with my friend Loco Moco. I was a featured artist on his album called Shiny Silver Snakes. It's super good. It's super rockin'. Check it out. You can buy my book, Fly to the Final Girl. It's a book of poetry about my childhood trauma, explored through the lens of horror movies, which is my favorite. And you can also book a private reading, a private astrology consultation, or a one-on-one mentorship session with me. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for doing the work. I'll talk to you soon. Happy healing. Bye. This one goes out to my status quo heathens. My